as you know, 57% of the French GNP is in public expenditures. Now, France is the country of Rousseau, with the myth of the good savage, the noble savage, and this is being sold to us by various myths like the bright socialist future, rosy tomorrows, or save the planet. Because this 57% has to be paid by taxes. Now, tax is a dirty word, even in France, so there is a contest running to rename taxes like contributions to public service, levies, deductions, and whatever. All those are nice stories to make people consent to paying taxes. Now, the Murphy's Law has been alluded to by Craig, saying that we had our own Energie vendor law in 2015. And one key point is that there is a goal to reduce the share of nuclear electricity from 75 to 50% by 2025. So, and all this being blind, of course, to various disasters from southern Australia to Germany through Denmark and Spain. So after having painted this disaster, looming disaster, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. You may have read or heard the day before yesterday that Nicolas Hulot, our Minister of the Environment, has promoted the reality principle above the precautionary principle and has said that this reduction of the nuclear share from 75 to 50% should be postponed to 2030 or even 2035 because there was no way intermittent energy supply could replace it. At the end of the tunnel is less public, but it is the position that major car makers have taken against the ideal electric car for its CO2 content or energy content or disposability of batteries or short autonomy or whatever. It is being idolized by Greenpeace and other major cities. In fact, there are many hang-ups about it. Those who have been vocal against the risks of the electric cars are Carlos Tavares, who is the head of Peugeot, Sergio Marchionne, who is the head of Fiat Chrysler, and Dieter Zetscher, who is the head of Daimler. So that's three heavyweights that have been vocal against all these rosy tomorrows. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Is that the 1 minute 30 I promised you?
Well, we may get to that, but in the meantime, thank you, Pierre. I appreciate very much your comments, and I think for the next one on my program, we are going to go to the country of the Netherlands. Netherlands provides an interesting case. They get, might be more along the lines of building a house on sticks and bricks. They are largely still fossil fuel dependent. Getting a vast bulk of their stuff, I guess, from natural gas for electricity generation. They are a signatory to the major climate agreements, however, and they've actually met them, but not by reducing CO2 so much, but other greenhouse gases, which is curious. They are going to be going more vigorous into renewable energies, and here to talk about that is Hans Labohm, who runs the skeptic site climategate.nl. He has written a book on this, and I followed him for a number of years, back in 2004, called Man-Made Global Warming, Unraveling the Dogma. And he's done several climate change papers dealing with sea level change, and one called Climate Change in a Nutshell. So, Hans, take it away.
Thank you, Greg. Do you hear me? Okay, fine. Well, you may have read in the papers that we have a new government now in the Netherlands. It is a government which consists of right of the center liberals, left of the center liberals, Christian Democrats, and Christians which are even more Christian than the Christian Democrats. They have a majority of 1 seat in Parliament, in the second chamber of Parliament. And as far as environment and as far as climate is concerned, they have more ambitious goals at the moment with this new coalition than the previous coalition had. Now, it's really fantastic, and we intend, or we tend to compare it with a serious case of collective insanity. What do they want? They want to reduce the emissions of CO2 with 49% by 2030. And that, of course, is very bad news. Now, we have a neighbor, and it has been referred to already this morning, and this neighbor is Germany. And it's a very famous and very important and influential politician in this country who said, and it has been referred before this morning, who said, and ich werde es mal auf Deutsch machen, die Wahrheit ist, dass wir vor dem Scheitern stehen mit der Energiewende. Die Wahrheit ist, dass wir die Komplexität unterschätzt haben. Und die anderen europäischen Länder halten uns sowieso für Bekloppte. Well, as far as the latter part is concerned, that was not completely true, because there was a small country in the west of Germany, which is the Netherlands, and there, well, it is very odd that apparently this message did not come through. We wanted to follow instead die Bekloppte, as we are doing now. So that is the bad news. Now, the good news is that we have an environmental assessment agency in the Netherlands. You could compare it with the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. And this environmental this environmental assessment agency is also pro-AGW, anthropogenic global warming, pro-climate, even more enthusiastic than the government is. And this agency has calculated that with these plans, with this climate policy, the government will only be able to achieve half of its goals. So that is the good news. Another item of good news is that despite all the climate propaganda, official climate propaganda, and despite all the disinformation in the media, the part of the population which thinks that climate is not a major problem is slowly growing, also in the UK, also in the Netherlands. And, well, of course, we are always very pessimistic about our efforts of the website, efforts of the climate skeptics in various countries. But isn't it odd that despite this overwhelming propaganda, we apparently are making progress in the sense that the population is losing its faith in the media and in the official propaganda.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move to the country of Germany. And of course, Germany is known for, and I would butcher the German on this, Energiewende, which was passed in 2010, calling for a 85 to 90% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. They want to see about 55, 60% renewable use by 2035. And if I had to liken them to one of the three little pigs, it clearly is the one that made its house out of straw. To speak about this is Dr. Holger Toos. Now, I've known Holger for years and years. He formerly worked with CFACT Europe, actually grew up in East Germany behind the Iron Curtain. Fascinating story that he tells about his lifetime there. And one of the real treats with CFACT and IKE going back the years is I've got to know him more and more, and I got to learn much of the German culture where you're all from and the wonderful food you have, the beer you drink, everything. And Holger's learned about our culture. I took him to McDonald's. Little thing, I actually remember this. Holger probably doesn't, but he went into an American McDonald's and actually wanted a beer. Now, maybe in Germany they do that. They don't in America. I said, Holger, they don't serve beer here. It's not done in America. And he goes, what, people actually come for the food? So anyway, here to talk about that House of Straw Energy Agenda is Dr. Holger Toos.
Thank you. So I have to tell you that these stories are almost true that he told you about us. No, I don't want to repeat Professor Alt's presentation and parts of my presentation from the morning. I just want to add that from my experience, we see a widening gap between what is really going on and what the politicians are telling us is going on. I think we have, for example, this figure that is almost not publicized, that the carbon emissions are going up despite politicians trying everything almost to make them decrease. And also there, from my experience, and this is, I think, the biggest problem, the Germans seem so convinced about the energy revolution, but then on the other hand, the methodology of all these polls that they were making is not published. And also when we request this, it's also not published. And 3-4 years ago, EIKE was doing an official request for information at the Bundesumweltamt, and they were not answering our letters in accordance with the law. So also there is a lot of stuff going on we don't know about. Apart from these strange Jamaica coalition talks, where the Greens, on the one hand, give up all the positions. They want to abolish, conventional cars, and all these stories. But then again, postpone this to the infinite future. So, on the other hand, widening gap between perception and what is really going on. On the other hand, we know that this green push is going to happen. I don't think that there can be any illusion that there won't be more green policies, and also involving so-called climate protection measures, that these green policies are going to happen. So you will see, I think there will be more stuff, there will be more restrictions. I think they will also to satisfy the green voters, or as I call them, the most useless party of Germany. To satisfy them, they will switch off coal-fueled power plants. But then, on the other hand, if you look around, the wires are already there. So it's going to be no time that energy from Poland or from the Czech Republic, which comes from coal-fueled power plants, that this will be imported. And also there is a lot of going on. Just to mention this, former chancellor in no time got this great job with Gazprom. This is also geopolitics. This is also influencing our energy policy. So I see big question marks everywhere, and I think the only thing that can be said is that the media totally got it wrong. And you can also see this, that so-called mainstream media is not represented here almost, apart from this little WDR team that was asking a few questions to one of our speakers. So I leave it at that. Crazy situation, but we will see what's going to happen.
Thank you, Holger. Next, thank you. Next up are my two American amigos, Marc Morano and James Taylor. Little known fact, we kind of met over smoking cigars. There's always, we've been going to UN conferences and these types of climate change gatherings for years and years, and it's a small clique that typically meets at these gatherings. And through the years, we've gotten to know each other over a good cigar now and then, but they are become amazing experts on the issue of U.S. climate and energy policy. I'll let you speak first, James. James has worked for years with the well-known American NGO Heartland Institute. You now have your own outfit, which I'm forgetting, oh yeah, Spark of Freedom Foundation, and has done wonderful work on going to state legislatures, testifying before Congress. He's a media hound, often in the mainstream media, dogging the climate alarmists in our particular country. He dogged them so much he had a wanted poster in Paris put around town wanting this guy's head for some, some of his antics against it.
You too.
And they had Marc also. I'm a little bit upset about that. Mine wasn't there. But anyway, first up, James, tell us about U.S. climate and energy policy in a nutshell.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Craig. It's interesting. After the Donald Trump election last year, the big question was, what will happen with the United States and the Paris Climate Treaty? Will Trump sign on? And when Trump ultimately said that the United States would not sign on as the agreement is written, the press in the United States and the global press lost their collective minds. But here's something to keep in mind. It did not make a difference, and it will not make a difference whether or not the United States signs on to Paris in terms of our carbon dioxide emissions. It's funny, after the Kyoto Protocol 20 years ago, George W. Bush made a similar announcement. The United States would not sign on. And we were vilified in the United States. The United States was called an outcast nation, a maverick. And what happened? What we see is right now the United States has reduced carbon dioxide emissions more than any other nation in the world. It's one thing to promise you're going to do something, and it's another thing to actually do it. Now, in the United States, our reductions in carbon dioxide emissions are largely the accidental result of economics. And I'll talk about that after this panel in my talk. But what happened essentially is the natural gas revolution brought about by fracking and advances in directional drilling mean that the cost of natural gas makes it such that natural gas power in the United States is less expensive than coal power. So without government mandates, without international treaties and pledges, our electricity mix since 2008 has declined from 48% coal to 30% coal. And most of that has been in the form of natural gas. Because of the economics of natural gas, our electricity prices have gotten lower in this mix. So it doesn't matter whether Donald Trump pledges this binding agreement, this promise, whatever it may be. Those are just words. But what really matters, if you are concerned about global warming, I think most of us here realize it's not the crisis people make it out to be. But if we accept the premise of the alarmists that we should be concerned about emissions, the Paris Agreement makes no difference whatsoever. And if we follow free market economics in the United States and globally, the quote-unquote problem of global warming will solve itself.
Thank you, James. Next up is Marc Morano. He is editor-in-chief of the organization that he and I both share, CFACT's Climate Depot News and Information Service. He formerly worked on Capitol Hill at the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, working closely with U.S. Senator James Inhofe. He frequently appears on U.S. media outlets around the world, and very importantly for everyone in here, he is the host of Climate Hustle, the movie we put out. And if you don't have your copy now, shameless plug, you need to buy it today. So anyway, without any further ado, Marc, what do you want to add to what James has just said?
Well, actually, what James has just said about the UN treaty, whether you care about global warming or not, the U.S. being part of it makes no difference. NASA's lead global warming scientist, just retired a few years ago, James Hansen, is here in Germany. He's at the Bonn conference. And what do you think he's up to? The global warming guru is condemning the UN Paris Pact. And he's using words that echo Senator Inhofe, my old boss in the Senate. He said that the goals and aspirations of the UN Paris, their ambitions are a, quote, hoax. This is in today's news. He's calling the conference a hoax, the pact a hoax. He says that politicians are going around slapping themselves on the back for accomplishing absolutely nothing. He's very upset. He doesn't think it goes far enough. This is a man who endorsed a book which suggested as one of its solutions ridding the world of industrial civilization. So he looks at the UN Paris Agreement as essentially meaningless symbolism, which, by the way, that's how skeptics look at. So I almost think Hansen would be welcome at this conference here at IKE because he would echo all the, you could have him come speak about what his criticisms are of the UN agreement, and I think we would all agree with him. He's got it. He understands it. He understands the meaningless drivel that comes out of the United Nations. And so what Hansen has done, he's signed on to a lawsuit with children. And this is elementary school kids through middle school. They're suing the United States government. Many other lawsuits like that are occurring. In New York City last year, the day I interviewed actually Bill Nye in Central Park when he suggested jailing skeptics was okay, Al Gore was but 20 blocks away having a press conference with United States Democratic Party attorney generals. What was this press conference about? The new movement in the United States to force action and to force centralized planning and regulations are to sue energy companies every time there's a tornado, a flood, a hurricane, and they're going to go after the energy CEOs and energy companies and say, you caused this flood. They actually have formulas. They're actually, I think ExxonMobil was, I can't remember the number, was like 27% responsible for Hurricane Harvey. Their emissions increased the odds. It's total, someone compared it to the works of Nostradamus or, it's silliness. They come up with all these statistical nonsense. But they're actually going to come after energy companies and start suing them. And given the state of our court system and the Clinton and Obama appointed judges, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually have traction on that. And I'm just going to take 2 more minutes. I want to talk about something that's slightly non-climate, just to talk about President Donald Trump. This was a man who was a celebrity host, millionaire, billionaire on his own. He owes no one anything in Washington. His strengths are that he's blunt, he speaks his mind, and he's politically incorrect. His weaknesses are that he's blunt, he speaks his mind, and he's politically incorrect. He has no filter. If he could just tweak himself a little bit, I think he could be a lot more effective. However, I don't think, at this point, I don't know that I would change anything about him. He's the most unique American president, probably in the last 100 years. He's the only president in my lifetime, and probably all your lifetimes, that's ever treasured negative notices in the media. In other words, when the media is out with knives trashing him, he seems to thrive on it. He calls CNN fake news. He goes after reporters by name. It's the most effective thing. Some of the reporters, Joe Scarborough and others on MSNBC, have said that Trump is actually sheer genius. That going into a weekend with news that may not be that favorable, he might do some tweet attacking the media or some celebrity, and suddenly Trump can divert the entire news media over to covering nonsense for the next 48 hours, and he gets a free pass. But because of that, relating it to climate, he seems to thrive on the fact that he's a lone wolf, that he's standing against the world. It all reinforces his skepticism and his rejection of the UN treaty. It's sort of the perfect storm, and for once, it's actually in skeptics' favor. So I salute President Donald Trump, and as we go forward, it's just amazing. I mentioned this in my talk. One of the key things he does is he goes to the rallies of 10, 20, 30,000 people about once a month, and it reinforces his anti-establishment Washington, reinforces his connection with why he's there. And as I mentioned, some of the biggest cheers he gets are when he talks about overturning the EPA nonsense climate rules and rejecting the United Nations climate treaty. The Americans love it. It reinforces it. So even if he goes home to bad advisors, it just has no impact because he's not listening to anyone in Washington. He loves the negative press. He's actually interested in keeping his promises and making his voters happy. And it's probably something we'll never see again in our lifetime in the U.S., so I'm enjoying it while it lasts. Thank you.